The dust hung like a veil over Leadville, Colorado, as Zara Ziegler clutched the foreclosure notice in her trembling hands, squinting at the bold red stamp that sealed her family's fate. She had arrived at the bank at dawn, determined to plead her case one final time, only to find the wooden shutters locked tight against her desperation. Now, as the morning sun climbed higher in the unforgiving Colorado sky of 1879, she sat defeated on the rough-hewn steps of Miners National Bank, her blue calico dress gathering the dirt that seemed to coat everything in this silver mining town. "They take everything," a deep voice drawled above her. Zara's head snapped up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the morning light. A stranger, a cowboy by the looks of his worn leather chaps and the distinctive hat shadowing his features. As he stepped closer, she noticed his eyes first steel blue and weather-worn like the Colorado mountains themselves. "I beg your pardon," she asked, quickly folding the notice and tucking it into her pocket. "The bank's." The cowboy's spurs clinked softly as he shifted his weight. "They take everything and leave good folks with nothing but dust." He removed his hat, revealing a shock of dark hair and a face that spoke of hard miles and harder decisions. "Name's Clayton Forester." She didn't immediately respond, instead studying his sun-browned face. He wasn't like the miners who populated most of Leadville, no. This man had the look of someone who'd ridden the open range, someone accustomed to vast spaces and his own company. "Zara Ziegler," she finally replied, not bothering to extend her hand. "And I don't need a stranger's observations about my situation, Mr. Forester." A half-smile played at the corner of his mouth. "Never said I was observing your situation in particular, Miss Ziegler, just making conversation on a fine morning." "There's nothing fine about this morning," she retorted, standing up and brushing the dust from her skirts. At her full height, she still had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "If you'll excuse me." She moved to step around him, but his voice stopped her. "Your father was Elijah Ziegler, wasn't he, the assayer?" Zara froze. "You knew my father?" Clayton Forester nodded slowly. "Knew of him. Honest man in a town that doesn't reward honesty. Is that why you're sitting outside a closed bank with a foreclosure notice?" Her eyes narrowed. "How did you—" "Same red stamp they put on my family's ranch notice 3 years back." He gestured toward her pocket. "I recognize the look of someone who's just lost everything. The question is, what do you aim to do about it?" Zara straightened her spine, the pride her father had instilled in her rising to the surface. "What can I do? My father died in that mine collapse last winter. I've been trying to keep his assay office running, but the bank says women have no business holding commercial property without a husband or father to vouch for them. They've called in the mortgage." The cowboy considered this, his gaze drifting down the busy main street of Leadville, where miners, merchants, and madams were beginning their day's business. "Sometimes," he said carefully, "the law isn't the only way to get justice." Zara's eyes widened. "I'm not looking to break any laws, Mr. Forester." "Clayton," he corrected. "And I'm not suggesting you rob the place, but I know something about Horace Bentley, the man who runs that bank, that might help your case." Despite herself, Zara felt a spark of interest. "And what might that be?" Clayton glanced around and then leaned closer. "Not something to discuss on a public street. I'm staying at the Silver Dollar Inn, room 14. If you're interested in saving your father's legacy, meet me there at noon." Before she could respond, he replaced his hat, tipped it slightly, and strode away down the street, leaving Zara to stare after him with a mixture of suspicion and desperate hope. She stood there longer than she meant to, watching his tall figure disappear into the crowd of miners and merchants that thronged Leadville's main street. The mining boom had transformed this mountain town from a simple placer camp to a roaring city of nearly 15,000 souls in just a few short years. Silver had brought wealth, but also greed and corruption that seeped into every corner of Leadville like the toxic tailings from the mines that poisoned the Arkansas River. Zara had no illusions about Clayton Forester. Men like him, drifters, cowboys, men without roots, were not to be trusted. Yet what choice did she have? In the 6 months since her father's death, she'd watched as one by one, the doors that might have led to salvation slammed shut in her face. She'd tried everything honorable. She'd continued her father's work, having learned the assaying trade at his side for years. She'd taken in mending and laundry. She'd even considered the marriage proposal from Edgar Simmons, the clerk at Harrington's General Store, though the thought of his damp hands touching her made her skin crawl. Now the bank was giving her 3 days to vacate the small building that had been both her father's business and their home. 3 days before, she would join the ranks of destitute women whose options in a mining town were severely limited and universally degrading. With a deep breath, Zara made her decision. She would meet this Clayton Forester, hear what he had to say, and then decide if his information was worth the risk that surely accompanied it. The Silver Dollar Inn was not the sort of establishment a respectable woman visited alone, but Zara had spent enough time in Leadville to know how to move through its rougher quarters without drawing undue attention. At precisely noon, she stood outside room 14, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. She knocked twice, softly. The door opened immediately, as if he'd been waiting just on the other side. Clayton Forester looked different without his hat, younger, perhaps, though still with that weathered quality that spoke of a life lived largely outdoors. "You came," he said, stepping back to let her enter. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I," Zara admitted, stepping cautiously into the small room. It was sparsely furnished: a bed, a washstand, a single chair by the window. Clayton gestured to the chair. "Please," he said. "Sit." She did, arranging her skirts carefully as he leaned against the wall opposite her, arms folded across his chest. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Forester?" she asked directly. "What's your interest in my situation?" A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Let's just say I have a personal grudge against Horace Bentley and his bank. I told you they took my family's ranch. What I didn't mention was that my father put a bullet through his head the next day." Zara's breath caught. I'm sorry." "It was a long time ago," he said, though his eyes suggested otherwise. "But I've been watching Bentley, tracking his dealings across 3 territories. The man's corrupt to his core. He's been working with the large mining companies to push out independent operators and smaller claims." "Like my father's assay office," Zara said, beginning to understand. Clayton nodded. "Your father was respected for his honest assessments. The big companies couldn't bribe him to misrepresent ore samples like some of the other assayers in town, so they found another way to be rid of him." "The mine collapse," Zara whispered, a cold dread spreading through her body. "Are you suggesting it wasn't an accident?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Clayton said carefully. "But I do know that Bentley has been falsifying loan documents, adding clauses after papers are signed, changing interest rates. I've spoken to a dozen people across Colorado who lost everything to his schemes." Zara's mind was racing. "But how does this help me?" "Even if what you say is true, I have no proof, and no judge in this county would take my word over Horace Bentley's. He's on the town council, for heaven's sake." Clayton pushed away from the wall and moved to the window, peering out at the bustling street below. "What if we could get proof? What if we could find the original loan document your father signed and compare it to what the bank is using to foreclose on you?" "Those would be locked in the bank vault," Zara pointed out. A slow smile spread across Clayton's face, transforming his stern features into something almost boyish. Yes, they would. And I happen to know that Bentley's assistant, a man named Thomas Wilkes, has developed a fondness for the games of chance at the Red Lady Saloon. A fondness that's put him deeply in debt. Zara felt her pulse quicken. You're suggesting we bribe this man to get access to private bank records. I'm suggesting that Mr. Wilkes might be persuaded to do the right thing if properly motivated, Clayton corrected. And if we find what I think we'll find, you won't just save your father's business, you could help a lot of other folks who have been swindled. Zara stood abruptly, pacing the small confines of the room. This is madness. I could end up in jail or worse. You could end up on the streets in 3 days with nothing, Clayton countered. What have you got to lose? She stopped pacing and looked at him directly. Why should I trust you? I don't know anything about you except that you have a vendetta against Bentley. Fair enough, he acknowledged. I was born on a cattle ranch near Denver. After we lost it, I drifted, worked as a ranch hand, sometimes as a guide for hunting parties in the mountains. I've been tracking Bentley's operations for 2 years now, gathering evidence, looking for a way to bring him down legally. He paused. I'm not asking you to trust me blindly, Miss Ziegler. Come with me to meet Wilkes tonight. Judge for yourself. Zara considered his words carefully. Everything in her upbringing warned against trusting this stranger with his dangerous plans. But hadn't her father always said that sometimes justice required courage? I'll meet this Wilkes, she finally agreed. But I make no promises beyond that. Clayton nodded, seemingly satisfied with this arrangement. The Red Lady, 10 o'clock tonight. Wear something that won't mark you as a proper lady. I don't own anything of the sort, she retorted. His eyes traveled over her simple dress with a frankness that made her cheeks warm. Then borrow something. This won't work if you look like a Sunday school teacher. I'll manage, she said stiffly, moving toward the door. 10 o'clock. One more thing, Clayton said as she reached for the handle. Don't tell anyone about this. Bentley has eyes and ears all over town. Zara nodded once and slipped out the door, wondering what madness had possessed her to agree to such a scheme. Yet as she walked back through town toward the small assay office that had been her home for all of her 24 years, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. The Red Lady Saloon pulsed with raucous energy, a cacophony of drunken laughter, tinny piano music, and the constant clinking of glasses. Zara stood in the shadows across the street, her borrowed dress feeling like a costume rather than clothing. Her neighbor, a widow named Martha who took in washing, had provided the garment, a faded red affair with a neckline lower than anything Zara had ever worn. You need to blend in, dear, Martha had said with a knowing look that suggested she understood more about Zara's situation than she let on. And sometimes, a woman needs weapons other than pistols. Now, pulling a worn shawl tighter around her shoulders, Zara watched the swinging doors of the saloon with trepidation. Clayton was nowhere to be seen, and she was beginning to think he had abandoned their plan or worse, that this had been some elaborate trick. You came. His voice materialized beside her, making her start. You have a habit of appearing out of nowhere, she accused, turning to find him watching her with those penetrating blue eyes. A useful habit in my line of work, he replied, then his gaze traveled over her attire. You'll do. Your approval wasn't what I was seeking, Zara said tartly. Where is this Wilkes person? Clayton gestured toward the saloon. Inside at the faro table. He'll be there until midnight or until his money runs out, whichever comes first. He offered his arm. Shall we? Zara hesitated only briefly before placing her hand on his forearm. The solid muscle beneath her fingers was oddly reassuring. How exactly do you intend to approach him? Directly, Clayton said as they crossed the street. Men like Wilkes respond to directness. But first, we establish a presence. You're going to be my lucky charm at the tables. I've never gambled in my life, she protested. Then it's a fine night to start, he replied with a grin that transformed his face entirely. For a moment, Zara glimpsed the man he might have been if tragedy hadn't set him on this path of vengeance. They pushed through the batwing doors together, and Zara fought to maintain her composure as a wall of sound, smoke, and scent hit her: whiskey, sweat, cheap perfume, and something else she couldn't name, but that spelled danger all the same. Several heads turned their way, male eyes lingering on her in a manner that made her instinctively move closer to Clayton. He guided her through the crowd toward a green felt table where a cluster of men were focused intently on cards and colored chips. Among them was a thin man with spectacles and a nervous manner who seemed out of place among the rough miners and cowboys. This, Zara guessed, must be Thomas Wilkes. Clayton led her to the bar first, ordering whiskey for himself, and something called a prairie flower for her, which turned out to be whiskey watered down with sugar and bitters. It burned her throat, but she managed not to cough. "Now we play," Clayton murmured close to her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "Follow my lead." For the next hour they moved from table to table, Clayton playing hands of poker with seemingly casual interest, while Zara learned the rhythms of the place. She watched as painted women circulated among the tables, laughing too loudly at men's jokes and earning their keep in ways she tried not to examine too closely. She observed the dealers with their quick hands and quicker eyes, always watching for cheaters. And she studied Thomas Wilkes, who played with increasing desperation as his stack of chips dwindled. Finally, when Wilkes had lost his last dollar and was staring dejectedly into an empty glass, Clayton made his move. "Rough night," he commented, sliding onto the empty stool beside the bank clerk and signaling the barkeeper for 2 whiskeys. Wilkes glanced up suspicious. "Do I know you?" "Not yet," Clayton said easily, sliding one of the whiskeys toward him. "But I think we might have some business to discuss." Wilkes eyed the drink, then Clayton, before his gaze slid to Zara. "What kind of business would I have with the likes of you?" "The profitable kind," Clayton replied. "The kind that could settle your debts at this establishment and leave you with something extra besides." Interest flickered in Wilkes's watery eyes. "I'm listening." Clayton leaned closer. "Not here. Let's find a table in the back." They moved to a secluded corner where the noise of the saloon provided cover for their conversation. Clayton wasted no time once they were seated. "I need to see some documents in the bank's vault," he said bluntly. "Loan agreements, specifically those for properties that have been foreclosed on in the past year." Wilkes paled. That's impossible. Mr. Bentley would have my head." "Mr. Bentley doesn't need to know," Clayton countered, "and we're willing to make it worth your while." He placed a small leather pouch on the table. The clink of coins was unmistakable. The bank clerk's eyes fixed on the pouch, but he shook his head. "It's too risky." "The vault has a combination lock that only Mr. Bentley knows." "But you have access to his office," Zara said, speaking for the first time. "Surely the combination is written down somewhere." Wilkes's gaze shifted to her, clearly reassessing her role in this conversation. "And who might you be, miss?" "Someone who's been wronged by Horace Bentley," she replied evenly. "Someone who knows I'm not the only one." The clerk's fingers drummed nervously on the table. "There are rumors," he admitted reluctantly, "about altered documents, inflated interest. But I've never seen proof." "Because the proof is in the vault," Clayton said. "The original documents compared to the modified ones would show everything." Wilkes drained his whiskey in one gulp. "Even if I wanted to help you, and I'm not saying I do, the risk is too great." Bentley has the sheriff in his pocket, half the town council too. Zara leaned forward, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. Mr. Wilkes, my father was Elijah Ziegler. He always spoke highly of you, said you were a man of principle working in difficult circumstances. This was a lie, but a calculated one. Her father had barely mentioned the bank's clerk, but she had seen how the man's expression softened at her father's name. Elijah was a good man, Wilkes said quietly. One of the few honest men in this town. His death was a terrible thing. Then help us, Zara pressed. Help me save his legacy. Wilkes looked between them, conflict evident on his narrow face. I could lose everything. You're already losing everything, one hand of cards at a time, Clayton observed. This way, at least you gain something in return and perhaps a measure of justice as well. The clerk was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed heavily. I might be able to get you into the bank after hours. Bentley keeps a spare key to the side door in his desk. And yes, the vault combination is in his personal ledger, but if we're caught, we won't be, Clayton assured him. When can you do this? Tomorrow night, Wilkes said, decision made. Bentley is attending a dinner with the mine owners at the Clarendon Hotel. He won't return to the bank until morning. 9 o'clock, Clayton said, sliding the pouch of coins across the table. This is half. You'll get the rest when we have the documents. Wilkes hesitated, then quickly pocketed the money. 9 o'clock. The alley behind the bank. Don't be late and come alone. He shot a meaningful glance at Zara. No offense, miss, but the fewer people involved, the better. She comes with us, Clayton said firmly. This concerns her most of all. The clerk looked as if he might argue, but then simply nodded in resignation. As you wish. Now, if you'll excuse me, I should leave separately to avoid suspicion. After Wilkes had gone, Zara turned to Clayton, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Do you trust him? About as far as I could throw him, Clayton replied. But greed and fear are powerful motivators, and he has both in abundance. What if it's a trap? She asked, voicing her deepest concern. What if he goes straight to Bentley? Clayton's expression hardened. Then Bentley will expect us tomorrow night, but we'll be long gone. However, I don't think Wilkes will betray us. He's in too deep with his gambling debts, and I suspect he knows more about Bentley's illegal activities than he's letting on. Men like that are always looking for a way out. Zara wasn't entirely convinced, but she nodded anyway. So we meet him tomorrow night. We do, Clayton confirmed. And if all goes well, by this time tomorrow you'll have the proof you need to save your father's business and put Horace Bentley behind bars where he belongs. As they left the Red Lady Saloon together, Zara was acutely aware of how quickly her life had changed in the span of a single day. This morning, she had been a desperate woman with no options. Tonight, she was a conspirator in a dangerous plan that could either save her or destroy her completely. And at the center of this transformation stood Clayton Forester, a man she still didn't fully trust, but who had somehow become her only hope. The night air was cool against her flushed skin as they walked in silence through the dimly lit streets of Leadville. Most of the businesses were closed at this hour, though light and noise spilled from the various saloons and gambling establishments that never seemed to sleep in a mining town. I'll see you safely home, Clayton said, breaking the silence. That isn't necessary, Zara replied automatically, though the thought of walking alone at this hour made her uneasy. It is, he insisted, his tone brooking no argument. Leadville isn't kind to women alone after dark. She couldn't dispute this truth, so they continued in silence until they reached the modest building that housed her father's assay office. The front room contained the equipment for testing ore sample scales, crucibles, chemicals, and the small furnace needed for fire assays. A door at the back led to their living quarters, two small rooms that had been home for as long as Zara could remember. At the door, she turned to face Clayton. "Thank you for escorting me," she said formally, "and for everything else." In the dim light of the street lamp, his expression was difficult to read. "Don't thank me yet. We're a long way from success." "Still," she persisted, "you didn't have to involve yourself in my troubles." Something flickered in his eyes, a vulnerability quickly masked. "Maybe I've been looking for a way to fight back for a long time. Maybe you just provided the opportunity." The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. For the first time, she saw beyond the hard exterior to the wounded man beneath, someone who, like her, had lost everything to Horace Bentley's greed. "Either way," she said softly, "I'm grateful." He nodded once, his gaze lingering on her face a moment longer than necessary. "Lock your door," he instructed. "I'll meet you here tomorrow at 8:30. After he had gone, Zara stood for a moment in the darkened assay office, surrounded by the familiar tools of her father's trade. Everything in this room represented his life's work, his integrity, his skill, his dedication to truth in an industry rife with deception. She ran her fingers along the edge of the workbench, where he had taught her the delicate art of separating precious metals from worthless rock. "I won't let them take this from us, Papa," she whispered to the empty room. "I promise." But as she prepared for bed, doubt crept in like the chill mountain air through the cracks in the walls. Was she being reckless, putting her trust in a stranger with his own vendetta? What if their plan failed? What if they were caught? These questions followed her into restless dreams where she ran through endless mine tunnels, pursued by shadows with Horace Bentley's laughing face, while her father's voice called from somewhere she could never reach. Morning came too soon, gray light filtering through the curtains as Zara rose and dressed with mechanical precision. The day stretched before her like an eternity, hours to fill before their nighttime rendezvous at the bank. She kept the assay office open as usual, though few customers came. Those who did found her distracted, her thoughts constantly returning to the night ahead. By late afternoon, unable to bear the waiting any longer, Zara closed the office and set out for a walk to clear her head. Her feet carried her instinctively toward the cemetery on the hill overlooking town, where her father's simple marker stood among dozens of others: miners, prostitutes, gunfighters, and children, the varied population of Leadville in death as in life. She knelt by her father's grave, brushing away the few weeds that had sprouted since her last visit. "I'm frightened, Papa," she admitted to the stone. "I don't know if what I'm doing is brave or foolish, but I know you wouldn't want me to give up without a fight." The mountain wind whispered through the aspen trees that dotted the cemetery, their leaves fluttering like silver coins in the late afternoon light. Zara took this as her answer, not a sign, precisely, but a reminder that life continued, that choices must be made and consequences faced. As dusk descended on Leadville, she made her way back to the assay office to prepare for the night ahead. She changed into practical clothing, a dark skirt and shirtwaist that wouldn't draw attention, sturdy boots for running if necessary. Then she sat by the window, watching the street and waiting for Clayton. He arrived precisely at 8:30, a shadow detaching itself from the gathering darkness. Zara opened the door before he could knock. "Are you ready?" he asked without preamble. She nodded, though her dry mouth and racing heart suggested otherwise. "Take only what you need," Clayton advised. "If things go wrong, we may need to leave town quickly." This possibility hadn't fully registered until now. "Leave town," she echoed, "but this is my home." "And it will remain so if all goes well," he assured her. "But we need to be prepared for all outcomes." Reluctantly, Zara gathered a few essential items: a change of clothing, what little money she had saved, and a small daguerreotype of her father. These she placed in a cloth satchel that she slung across her body. "Lead the way," she said, squaring her shoulders. They moved through the back streets of Leadville, avoiding the main thoroughfares where they might be recognized. The night had grown cold, as it often did in the mountains even in summer, and Zara pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Beside her, Clayton walked with a casual alertness, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "What if Wilkes doesn't come?" she asked in a hushed voice as they approached the alley behind the bank. "Then we find another way," Clayton replied simply. "There's always another way." The alley was deserted when they arrived, the back of the bank building a dark, featureless wall broken only by a single door and a high, narrow window. They waited in the shadows, minutes stretching into what felt like hours, though Zara knew it couldn't have been more than a quarter hour. Then a soft sound, the scrape of a key in a lock, and the door opened just enough to reveal Thomas Wilkes's anxious face. "Quickly," he hissed, glancing nervously up and down the alley. They slipped inside, and Wilkes immediately locked the door behind them. They stood in a small storeroom filled with ledgers and office supplies, lit only by the clerk's shielded lantern. "The vault's this way," Wilkes whispered, leading them through a connecting door into the bank proper. The main room was eerily silent, the tellers' cages standing like skeletal sentinels in the dim light. Their footsteps, despite their efforts at silence, echoed on the hardwood floors. At the far end of the room stood Bentley's private office, and beyond that, the heavy iron door of the vault. Wilkes unlocked Bentley's office with shaking hands. "I'll need to get the combination," he said, moving to a desk drawer. As the clerk rummaged through papers, Zara's gaze was drawn to a large portrait hanging on the wall. Horace Bentley himself, painted in oils, his cold eyes seeming to follow her movements with disapproval. "Here it is," Wilkes announced, holding up a small leather notebook. "Bentley changes the combination monthly. The current one should be the last entry." They moved to the vault, where Wilkes fumbled with the dial, muttering numbers under his breath. The lock mechanism clicked, and with a satisfied nod, the clerk pulled the heavy door open. "The loan documents will be in the filing cabinet to the left," he instructed. "Organized by date. I'll keep watch." Inside the vault, Clayton held the lantern high as Zara began searching through the meticulous files. Her fingers trembled as she located her father's name and pulled out the folder. "Here," she breathed, opening it to reveal two documents. One, the original loan agreement her father had signed 5 years ago. The other, a modified version with significantly higher interest rates and additional clauses that had never been part of the original contract. "This is it," she said, showing Clayton the discrepancy. "The original loan was for 5 years at 2% interest. This new document claims it was 3% with a balloon payment due immediately upon his death." Clayton's jaw tightened as he examined the papers. "The signatures don't even match properly. He must have forged your father's hand on the new document." Zara felt a strange mixture of vindication and rage. "We need to find more examples, if we can prove this is a pattern." They worked quickly, pulling files for other properties that had been foreclosed upon in recent months. Each told the same story: original agreements altered, terms changed, signatures forged. "This is enough to ruin him," Clayton said grimly, gathering the evidence. "Enough to send him to prison." A sudden noise from the outer room froze them both. "Someone's coming," Wilkes hissed from the doorway, his face ashen. "We need to go. Now." They scrambled out of the vault, Wilkes hurriedly spinning the dial to lock it while Clayton extinguished the lantern. From the main banking floor came the unmistakable sound of keys in the front door. "The back exit," Wilkes urged, pushing them toward the storeroom. Quickly! But before they could reach it, the front door swung open, and the imposing figure of Horace Bentley himself stood silhouetted against the street lamps. "Well, well," his cultured voice sliced through the darkness. "What have we here? Thieves in my bank." Bentley wasn't alone. Behind him loomed the sheriff and 2 deputies, all with hands resting on their holstered revolvers. "It's not what it looks like, Mr. Bentley," Wilkes stammered, stepping forward with his hands raised placatingly. "I was just checking. Save your pathetic excuses, Wilkes," Bentley snapped. "I've known about your gambling debts for months. Did you really think I wouldn't be watching you? That I wouldn't be informed the moment you started conspiring with these people?" He spat the last word as if it tasted foul. The sheriff moved forward, his hand now drawing his pistol. "You're all under arrest for breaking and entering, attempted theft. We're not thieves," Zara interrupted, stepping into the pool of lantern light with her chin raised defiantly. "We're here to expose the real criminal in this room." Bentley laughed, a sound entirely devoid of humor. Bold words from a woman caught red-handed in a bank vault after hours. "What exactly were you looking for, Miss Ziegler? Gold? Cash? Or perhaps something more specific?" Clayton moved to stand beside Zara, his voice low and dangerous. "We were looking for evidence of your fraud, Bentley." "Evidence we found." He held up the stack of documents they had collected. "Original loan agreements and your forged versions side by side. Enough to convince even the most corrupt judge in Colorado that you've been systematically defrauding this entire town." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Bentley's face. "Sheriff, arrest these people immediately. They're clearly delusional, making wild accusations to cover their crime." The sheriff hesitated, his gaze moving between Bentley and the documents in Clayton's hand. "What exactly are you claiming, Forester?" "I'm claiming that Horace Bentley has been altering loan documents after they're signed, raising interest rates, adding clauses, and then foreclosing on properties when the owners can't meet the new terms," Clayton explained. "He's been doing this for years, across 3 territories. I've been tracking him since he did the same to my family's ranch near Denver." "Preposterous," Bentley blustered, but there was sweat forming on his brow now. "Sheriff, do your duty." The sheriff studied Clayton for a long moment, then made a decision. "Let me see those papers." "Sheriff," Bentley protested. "Quiet, Horace," the lawman said firmly. "I'm willing to look the other way on a lot of things in this town, but if what they're saying is true, it's all lies," Bentley insisted, his composure cracking. With surprising swiftness for a man of his bulk, he lunged forward, reaching inside his coat. "Gun!" Clayton shouted, pushing Zara behind him as Bentley drew a small derringer from a hidden pocket. The crack of a pistol shot echoed deafeningly in the confined space of the bank. For a suspended moment, no one moved. Then Bentley looked down in confusion at the spreading crimson stain on his expensive waistcoat. He took one stumbling step backward before collapsing heavily to the floor. Zara turned to see the sheriff's smoking revolver still aimed at the spot where Bentley had stood. "Damn fool," the lawman muttered, holstering his weapon. "Never draw on a man who's faster than you." The next hours passed in a blur for Zara. The sheriff, having confirmed the validity of the documents they'd found, took official statements from all 3 of them. Thomas Wilkes, now free from Bentley's influence, provided additional details about the banker's fraudulent practices. By dawn, word had spread throughout Leadville that Horace Bentley was dead and his criminal enterprise exposed. Zara sat on a bench outside the sheriff's office as the first light of day touched the mountain peaks surrounding the town. She felt empty, drained of emotion after the night's events. The foreclosure notice was now meaningless. The sheriff had assured her that all of Bentley's recent business dealings would be reviewed, and where fraud was found, reversed. She had saved her father's legacy. But at what cost? A man was dead, however deserving of his fate he might have been. And she had ventured far beyond the boundaries of her former life into a realm of danger and moral ambiguity from which there was no return. "You should get some rest," Clayton's voice broke into her thoughts as he emerged from the sheriff's office. "It's been a long night." She looked up at him, noting the fatigue etched in the lines around his eyes. "What happens now?" He settled beside her on the bench with a weary sigh. "The sheriff's sending telegrams to Denver and Santa Fe, alerting the authorities there to Bentley's operations. There will be investigations, court proceedings eventually. But your father's business is safe. All the fraudulent foreclosures will be nullified." "And what about you?" she asked quietly. "Will you stay in Leadville now that your vendetta is complete?" Clayton was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the street where early morning workers were beginning to appear. "I hadn't thought that far ahead," he admitted. "For 3 years, bringing Bentley to justice has been my only purpose. Now that it's done." He trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. "You could stay," Zara suggested, surprising herself with the words. "Leadville has opportunities for a man with your skills." A half-smile touched his lips. "My skills? Breaking into banks and uncovering financial fraud." "Pursuing justice," she corrected. "Standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves. This town could use more men like that." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that in the space of 24 hours they had forged a connection that transcended their initial meeting of convenience. "Perhaps I could," Clayton said thoughtfully. "At least for a while." As the sun rose fully over Leadville, bathing the rough mining town in golden light, Zara felt the first stirrings of something she had not expected to feel again after her father's death. Hope for the future, and the strange, unsettling sense that her life was about to change in ways she could not yet imagine. 3 weeks later, Leadville was still buzzing with the aftermath of what people had taken to calling the Bentley affair. The banker's death and the exposure of his crimes had sent shockwaves through the community, leading to the discovery of similar schemes in banks throughout Colorado's mining districts. A special prosecutor had been dispatched from Denver to untangle the web of fraud, and dozens of foreclosures had been reversed, returning property to its rightful owners. For Zara, life had assumed a new rhythm. The assay office was busier than ever as miners sought out her father's reputation for honest evaluations of their ore. She had hired an assistant, a young widow named Sarah with a head for figures, to help manage the increased workload. And then there was Clayton. True to his word, he had remained in Leadville, taking a room at a respectable boarding house and offering his services as a security consultant to local businesses, concerned about the rash of robberies that had plagued the town in recent months. His presence in Zara's life had become a constant. He often stopped by the assay office in the evenings, sometimes bringing dinner, other times simply sitting with her as she completed the day's paperwork. They never spoke directly of what was developing between them, this tentative thing that was more than friendship, but had not yet been defined. It existed in shared glances, in the brush of his hand against hers as he passed her a cup of coffee, in the way he had begun to speak of the future using we instead of I. On this particular evening in late August, they sat together on the small porch behind the assay office, watching the sunset paint the surrounding mountains in shades of pink and gold. A comfortable silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sounds of Leadville's evening activities, starting up piano music from the saloons, the clatter of wagons on the main street. "I received a letter today," Clayton said finally. From the territorial governor's office. Zara turned to him, curious. What did it say? They've offered me a position, he replied, a note of wonder in his voice. Special investigator for the Banking Commission. They want me to continue what I started with Bentley, uncovering financial fraud across the territory. That's wonderful, Zara said warmly. You would be perfect for such a role. Clayton nodded slowly. It would mean traveling, though, visiting banks throughout Colorado, possibly even into Wyoming and New Mexico territories. Something cold settled in Zara's stomach at these words. She had known, of course, that Clayton was not a man to stay in one place for long. Yet in the weeks since Bentley's death, she had allowed herself to imagine a different future, one where he remained in Leadville, where their cautious friendship might grow into something deeper. You should accept, she said, keeping her voice steady with effort. It's important work. He studied her face in the fading light. I already have, he said, but there's something I need to ask you first. Zara's heart skipped a beat as Clayton shifted to face her more directly. These past weeks, he began, uncharacteristically hesitant, have been unexpected. When I came to Leadville, I was a man with only one purpose. I never thought. He paused, seeming to gather his courage. I never thought I would find someone who could understand what drives me, who shares my sense of justice, who makes me want to be more than what I am. He reached for her hand, and she allowed him to take it, her pulse racing beneath his touch. The position requires travel, he continued, but I would have a home base in Denver, a place to return to between assignments. His blue eyes held hers steadily. What I'm asking, Zara, is whether you might consider coming with me. She stared at him, momentarily speechless. Coming with you. To Denver, as my wife, Clayton clarified, his voice rough with emotion. I know it's sudden. I know we've known each other only a short time, but I also know that what's between us is rare and precious. I don't want to lose it before we've had the chance to discover what it might become. Zara looked down at their joined hands, her thoughts whirling. Leave Leadville. Leave her father's business, the only home she had ever known. Yet even as these questions arose, she knew the answer that her heart had already formed. The assay office, she said slowly. I can't simply abandon it. It was my father's life's work. Clayton nodded, understanding. Could you sell it? To someone who would maintain his standards, his reputation for honesty? Zara considered this. Perhaps. My assistant Sarah has been learning quickly. With some additional training, she might be able to take it over, maintain the business in my father's name. And there are assay offices in Denver as well, Clayton pointed out. Your skills would not go to waste. She looked up at him, this man who had walked into her life on the darkest of days and brought with him the promise of justice, of a new beginning. Are you certain this is what you want? A wife who knows more about fire assays than embroidery, who speaks her mind perhaps more than a proper lady should. A slow smile spread across his face, warming his eyes. I have never wanted a proper lady, Zara. I want you exactly as you are. Stubborn, brave, brilliant you. Something expanded in her chest, a feeling too large to contain. Then yes, she said simply. I will come with you to Denver. I will be your wife. The joy that transformed his features made him look younger, unburdened by the weight of the past he had carried for so long. He leaned forward, one hand gently cupping her cheek as he kissed her, a kiss that spoke of promise, of beginnings, of a future neither of them could have imagined when they first met on the steps of a closed bank. When they finally parted, the first stars had appeared in the darkening sky above Leadville. We'll make a good team, Mrs. Forester, Clayton said softly, the name a promise of what was to come. We already do, Mr. Forester, Zara replied with a smile. We already do. The wedding took place on a crisp September morning in Leadville's small Presbyterian church. It was a modest affair, attended by the few friends Zara had made during her years in the mining town, and several of the local businessmen who had come to respect Clayton during his brief time there. Sarah, Zara's assistant, stood as her witness, while a former sheriff from Denver whom Clayton had once worked with served as his. Zara wore a simple dress of ivory silk, an extravagance she had allowed herself after the sale of the assay office to Sarah had been finalized the week before. Clayton, in a new black suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, watched her walk down the aisle with an expression of such naked adoration that Zara felt her cheeks warm beneath the thin veil. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, the minister's words about partnership and mutual respect resonating deeply with both bride and groom. When they exchanged their vows, Clayton's voice was steady and sure, while Zara's trembled slightly with emotion she could not fully contain. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared, and as Clayton kissed her before the assembled guests, Zara felt the last shadows of her former life lifting away, replaced by the bright promise of their shared future. The couple left Leadville the following day, traveling by stagecoach down the mountain to Denver. It was a jarring, uncomfortable journey, but Zara found herself marveling at the changing landscape, the alpine meadows giving way to foothills, and eventually the high plains that surrounded Colorado's capital city. Denver in 1879 was a far cry from the rough mining town they had left behind. Though still a frontier city with its share of saloons and gambling halls, it also boasted fine hotels, theaters, and elegant homes that spoke of permanent prosperity rather than the boom and bust cycle of the mining districts. Clayton had arranged for temporary accommodations in a respectable boarding house while they searched for a more permanent home. The banking commission offices were located in a new government building downtown, and on their second day in the city, Clayton took Zara to meet his new employers. Mrs. Forester, the commissioner greeted her warmly. "Your husband has told us of your role in exposing Bentley's fraud. The territory owes you a debt of gratitude." "I was merely protecting what was rightfully mine," Zara replied modestly. "Clayton is the one who pursued justice beyond his personal interests." The commissioner nodded approvingly. "Which is precisely why we hired him. Banking fraud is becoming increasingly sophisticated as our territory grows. We need men and women of principle to combat it." Zara tilted her head curiously. "Women, indeed," the commissioner said. "In fact, I had hoped to discuss a possibility with you both." He gestured for them to sit. "Mr. Forester will be traveling extensively in his role, investigating suspicious banking activities throughout the territory. But much of the fraud can be detected through careful examination of financial documents looking for patterns, inconsistencies, altered figures. Work that requires a keen eye, attention to detail, and discretion." Clayton glanced at Zara with a growing smile. "Sir, are you offering my wife a position?" "As a document examiner and financial analyst, yes," the commissioner confirmed. "It would allow you to work together on cases, combining your different but complementary skills." Mrs. Forester's experience with detailed assaying work makes her ideally suited for this role. Zara sat stunned, having expected to seek employment in one of Denver's assay offices once they were settled. I'm honored by your confidence, sir. Is this something you would be interested in?" The commissioner asked. She looked at Clayton, who was watching her with warm encouragement in his eyes. "It is," she said decisively. "Very much so." And so began a new chapter in their lives. They found a small but comfortable house on the outskirts of Denver, close enough to the banking commission offices for convenience, but with enough land around it to remind Zara of the mountain air and open spaces she had loved in Leadville. They furnished it simply but with care, creating a home that reflected both their practical natures and their appreciation for beauty. Their work proved as challenging and rewarding as they had hoped. Clayton's investigations took him throughout Colorado and occasionally into neighboring territories, but he never stayed away for more than a week at a time. When he returned, they would sit together in their small study, comparing notes and findings, Zara's meticulous analysis of documents often providing the crucial evidence needed to build cases against fraudulent bankers and unscrupulous businessmen. They became known as a formidable team, their reputation spreading beyond Denver to the financial centers of the East. Clayton's determination and Zara's attention to detail complemented each other perfectly, and they found that the partnership they had forged in marriage extended seamlessly into their professional lives. Yet it was not all work. In the evenings, they discovered shared interests they had never had time to explore during the fraught days of their beginning in Leadville. Clayton revealed a surprising talent for chess, which Zara quickly set about mastering with her characteristic determination. She introduced him to her love of literature, reading aloud from Dickens and Twain as they sat before the fire on winter evenings. Together, they learned to navigate the social obligations that came with their positions, attending the occasional dinner or theater performance while always feeling most at home in each other's quiet company. Their first Christmas as husband and wife brought an unexpected blizzard that blanketed Denver in snow and confined them to their home for 3 days. They lit every lamp and stoked the fire high against the cold, creating a warm haven as the storm raged outside. "I have something for you," Clayton said on Christmas morning, producing a small package wrapped in silver paper. "It's not much, but—" Zara unwrapped it carefully to reveal a delicate silver locket. Opening it, she found a tiny photograph of her father on one side, and on the other, a miniature portrait of Clayton himself. "So you always have both the men who love you close to your heart," he explained softly. Tears sprang to her eyes as she fastened it around her neck. "It's perfect," she whispered, "but now I fear my gift pales in comparison." Clayton unwrapped the handsome leather satchel she had commissioned for his travels, his initials stamped in gold on the flap. "Nonsense," he said, genuinely pleased. "This is exactly what I needed. How did you know?" "I notice things," Zara replied with a smile. "It's what makes me good at my job." He laughed and pulled her into his arms. "One of many things that make you good at everything you do, Mrs. Forester." As they stood together by the window, watching the snow transform the world outside into a pristine wonderland, Zara reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. From the desperate woman sitting outside a closed bank to a respected professional with a loving husband and a purpose that fulfilled her deepest need for justice, it was a transformation she could never have imagined. "What are you thinking?" Clayton asked, his arms encircling her waist from behind. "That sometimes the worst days of our lives lead us to the best," she replied honestly. "If Bentley hadn't foreclosed on my father's business, if I hadn't been sitting on those bank steps that morning, if a passing cowboy hadn't made an observation about banks taking everything," Clayton added, his voice warm with memory. Zara turned in his arms to face him. "Do you remember what I said to you that day? That I didn't need a stranger's observations about my situation?" "As I recall, you were quite adamant about it," he said with a grin. "I was wrong," she admitted, rising on tiptoe to kiss him softly. "I needed you more than I could possibly have known." As spring blossomed across Denver in 1880, so too did news that brought both joy and trepidation to the Forester household. Zara was expecting their first child. The discovery came after several weeks of unexplained fatigue and nausea that she had initially attributed to a particularly demanding case involving fraudulent mining stock certificates. "A baby," Clayton said wonderingly when the doctor confirmed their suspicions. "We're going to have a baby." His evident delight eased some of Zara's anxiety. Though they had discussed children in abstract terms, the reality of impending parenthood was daunting, particularly given their unconventional professional lives. "What about our work?" she asked as they walked home from the doctor's office, her hand tucked securely in the crook of Clayton's arm. "The banking commission will still be there," Clayton assured her. "We'll adjust. People do it all the time. Not people like us," Zara pointed out. "Women aren't expected to continue working after they have children, especially not in government positions." Clayton stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious. "You want to continue working?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I love what we do, the difference we make. But I also want to be a good mother. I don't know if I can be both." He took both her hands in his. "Zara Forester, if anyone can find a way to be exceptional at two challenging roles simultaneously, it's you, and you won't be doing it alone." His eyes held a promise. "We're partners in everything, remember." His confidence bolstered her own, and over the following months, they prepared for the baby's arrival with the same methodical thoroughness they applied to their cases. Clayton converted the small third bedroom of their house into a nursery, painting the walls a cheerful yellow and building a cradle with his own hands. Zara continued working at the banking commission, gradually shifting more of her duties to document examination that could eventually be done from home when necessary. The baby, a boy they named Elijah Clayton Forester, in honor of Zara's father, arrived on a stormy October night after a difficult labor that left both new parents exhausted but exhilarated. He had Clayton's blue eyes and what promised to be Zara's determined chin, a combination that made them both laugh when they noticed it. "Poor child," Clayton joked as he held his son for the first time. "With the two of us for parents, he'll never get away with anything." "Good," Zara replied, her eyes never leaving the tiny face that had already captured her heart completely. "The world needs more honest men." Parenthood brought changes to their lives, as it inevitably does, but not in the ways society might have expected. After a brief period at home with the baby, Zara resumed her work with the banking commission, though on a reduced schedule. Clayton rearranged his investigation calendar to ensure he was home more regularly, taking shorter, more frequent trips rather than extended ones. They hired a kindly widow named Mrs. Holloway to help care for Elijah when both parents needed to be at the office, but they also took turns bringing the baby to work when circumstances allowed. The banking commissioner, himself a father of 4, proved surprisingly accommodating, recognizing the value of keeping both Foresters engaged in their important work. "He's going to grow up surrounded by banking regulations and fraud investigations," Clayton observed one evening as he gently rocked Elijah to sleep, while Zara pored over a stack of suspect loan documents at their kitchen table. "Most unusual education for a child. He'll understand the importance of integrity from an early age," Zara replied with a smile, "and the consequences of its absence." As Elijah grew from infant to toddler to an inquisitive young boy, the rhythm of their family life evolved, but remained centered on the values that had brought them together: justice, honesty, and an unwavering commitment to each other. When Elijah was 4, a letter arrived from Leadville that brought bittersweet news. Sarah, who had purchased Zara's father's assay office, was writing to inform them that she had received an offer from one of the larger mining companies to buy the business. "She wants to know if I object," Zara told Clayton as they sat together on their front porch, watching Elijah chase fireflies in the summer twilight. She says the company has promised to maintain the Ziegler name and standards, but she feels she needs my blessing. Clayton studied his wife's face in the fading light. And how do you feel about it? Zara considered the question carefully. I thought I would feel sad or perhaps even angry that my father's independent business would become part of a corporation, but instead I feel peaceful. The assay office served its purpose for my father, for me, for Sarah. Perhaps now it will serve a new purpose while still honoring his legacy. You've come a long way from that woman sitting outside the closed bank, Clayton observed softly. We both have, she replied, reaching for his hand. That day, I thought I had lost everything. I couldn't see that I was about to gain so much more. They wrote back to Sarah giving their blessing for the sale, with the stipulation that the Ziegler name remain associated with honest assaying practices. With that final connection to Leadville resolved, Zara felt a chapter of her life truly close, making room for new beginnings. Those new beginnings came in unexpected forms. The following year, the Banking Commission expanded its purview to include investigation of land fraud, an increasingly prevalent problem as settlers and speculators flooded into the Western territories. Clayton's experience and reputation made him the natural choice to head the new division, a promotion that came with increased responsibility and a welcome increase in salary. At the same time, Zara found herself drawn to the educational aspects of their work. She began developing materials to help ordinary citizens protect themselves from financial fraud, simple guides explaining how to verify banking documents, what questions to ask before signing loans, and warning signs of suspicious financial arrangements. Prevention is as important as prosecution, she explained to Clayton as she showed him her draft pamphlets. If we can teach people to recognize fraud before they become victims, we save them from losses they might never recover from. Her initiative caught the attention of the territorial governor, who authorized the printing and distribution of her guides throughout Colorado. Soon, Zara was receiving invitations to speak to women's groups, farming cooperatives, and mining associations about financial self-protection. Her practical, plain-spoken approach resonated with audiences who found traditional banking information intimidating or confusing. You found your calling within your calling, Clayton observed proudly after attending one of her presentations to a packed hall in Colorado Springs. You were meant to be a teacher as well as an investigator. Elijah, now 6 and accompanying his parents on this particular trip, had sat in the front row watching his mother with unabashed admiration. "Can I help with the next one, Mama?" he asked afterward. "I could hand out the papers or something." Zara's heart swelled at her son's eagerness to participate in her work. Like his father, Elijah had developed a strong sense of justice at an early age, along with a protective instinct toward those he perceived as vulnerable. "I think that's an excellent idea," she told him. "Every good presentation needs a reliable assistant." As the years passed, the Foresters' reputation as champions of financial justice continued to grow. Clayton's investigations led to the prosecution of land speculators, who had defrauded hundreds of homesteaders with false claims and forged deeds. Zara's educational programs expanded to include specialized guidance for women, immigrants, and others particularly vulnerable to exploitation. Elijah grew into a thoughtful young man who inherited both his father's physical presence and his mother's analytical mind. When he was 16, he announced his intention to study law, a decision that surprised neither of his parents. "I want to defend people who can't defend themselves," he explained over dinner one evening, "like you both have always done. Zara and Clayton exchanged a glance of quiet pride. Whatever challenges they had faced in balancing their unconventional family life with their commitment to justice, this moment confirmed they had succeeded in passing their most cherished values to their son. Life, of course, brought its share of sorrows along with its joys. Mrs. Holloway, who had been such an important part of Elijah's early years, passed away peacefully in her sleep when he was 12, leaving a void in their household that took time to heal. News occasionally reached them from Leadville of the passing of old acquaintances, as the boom town settled into a more stable existence. And in 1891, a telegram arrived from Santa Fe bearing news that Thomas Wilkes, the bank clerk, whose cooperation had been crucial in exposing Horace Bentley's crimes, had died after a brief illness. Though they had maintained only sporadic contact with Wilkes over the years, the news affected both Clayton and Zara deeply, serving as a reminder of how their shared story had begun. "We should visit Leadville," Clayton suggested, as they sat together in their study that evening. "It's been too long, and there are ghosts we perhaps need to make peace with." Zara nodded, feeling the weight of memory and the passage of time. "Yes," she agreed. "I'd like to see what's become of the place, and I think Elijah should see where his parents' story began." And so, almost 15 years after they had left the mining town as newlyweds, the Forester family returned to Leadville. The stagecoach ride up the mountain was smoother now, the road having been improved to accommodate the increasing traffic between Denver and the still prosperous mining district. Leadville itself had changed, grown more settled, less raw, though it retained the essential character of a town built on the boom and bust cycle of mining. Many of the hastily constructed wooden buildings of Zara's youth had been replaced by more substantial structures of brick and stone. The Red Lady Saloon, where they had met with Thomas Wilkes, was now a respectable hotel. The Miners' National Bank, once Horace Bentley's domain, operated under new ownership with a reputation for fair dealing. They stayed 3 days, visiting old landmarks and introducing Elijah to this important piece of his family history. On their final afternoon, Zara and Clayton walked together to the cemetery on the hill while Elijah remained in town, exploring the mining museum that now occupied part of what had once been the territorial courthouse. They found Elijah Ziegler's grave easily, the simple stone marker now weathered by 15 Colorado winters, but still standing straight and dignified among the aspens. Zara knelt to clear away the fallen leaves from its base, her fingers tracing the carved letters of her father's name. "He would be proud of you," Clayton said quietly, standing behind her. "Of what you've accomplished, of the woman you've become, of the son you've raised." Zara rose and turned to face her husband, noticing the strands of silver now threading through his dark hair, the lines around his eyes that spoke of years in the sun and wind. He was no longer the hard-edged cowboy who had approached her on the bank steps all those years ago, just as she was no longer the desperate young woman with nowhere to turn. Life had softened them in some ways, strengthened them in others, and bound them together through shared purpose and love. "He would be proud of us," she corrected gently, "of what we've built together." Clayton smiled and took her hand. "Do you ever regret it, leaving Leadville, choosing this path?" Zara looked out over the town below, then back to her husband's face, still, after all these years, her anchor and her North Star. "Not for a single day," she replied truthfully. "How could I regret the journey that brought me everything I never knew I needed?" As they walked back down the hill toward town, arm in arm beneath the golden aspen leaves of autumn, Zara reflected on the strange alchemy of life, how loss could become gain, how endings could become beginnings, how a chance meeting outside a closed bank could open the door to a future brighter than any she could have imagined. "They take everything," Clayton had said to her that day, speaking of banks and the powerful men who ran them. He hadn't been wrong. Horace Bentley had tried to take everything from both of them. But in their determination to fight back, to seek justice, to build something meaningful from the ashes of what they had lost, they had discovered the one thing that could never be taken: the love that had grown between them, steady and sure as the Colorado mountains that had witnessed their beginning. And that, Zara knew with absolute certainty, was worth everything else.